So what I'd like to do is I'd like to just take just a few minutes today to tell you guys about the Space Frontier Foundation, what we do, our role in sort of the new space community, our role over time, and then some of the stuff we're going to be doing over the next, shall we say, year or three. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the organization, so just 10 seconds of history. Founded in 1988, so it's coming up on its 30th birthday pretty soon, so almost to middle age as an organization. I think a lot of people think, when they think of the organization, they think of either the NewSpace Conference, which is our big event that we'll be holding in Seattle this year. It's bounced between Seattle and San Francisco the last 2 years. They think of our policy and advocacy work that we do in Washington, D.C. If we're really lucky, they think of some of our thought leadership work, or maybe some of the work we do with space entrepreneurs and things like that. But in a word, and this next slide here, this is the credo of the organization, and you can read it in its entirety, but the way I like to say it is, it's an organization dedicated to space settlement. And what do I mean by that? It's that there are a whole bunch of organizations in our industry writ large that serve a bunch of different purposes. So there are organizations that are industry groups that represent the needs of the industry. There are organizations that allow us to have meetings like this one. There are organizations or companies, say, that are dedicated to, making their founders and their investors and everybody else money and serving the needs of other customers, the government, private sector, what have you. Simply put, the Space Frontier Foundation was founded by a small core group that's grown into a very large group over the last 30 years. And the purpose of the organization was take whatever steps are necessary to get us into space as humanity over the course of sort of I think the original words were the lifetime of the founders, that all of us don't want to die with humanity not having a future in space. And so to that end, while we're interested in a lot of other things that are going on, small sat and big data applications might be interesting, DoD applications might be interesting, our main goal in the areas we tend to fixate are how do we make sure that we all have that future. And we try to give all of you in the industry permission to acknowledge that that's why a lot of us are here. If you just wanted to get into a business to do something cool and technical, and you wanted to do that and you wanted to make money doing it, there are a lot of other industries, guys. You don't need to be here in the middle of the desert talking about your projects. There are a lot of other ways to do it. And at Space Frontier, we try to be open about that fact. Let's not beat around the bush and pretend that we're here because we just want to get rich. That's the only reason we got into space. There's meaning and there's message, and it's okay to acknowledge that. And so to that end, the organization has, over time, employed a bunch of different tools. So early in our history, for those who've followed us or know some of our founders or know people who were spokesmen in the past, our early history, and I would say sort of the first 10 years, so maybe 1988 to maybe 1998, that first 10 years, we were basically just a media and advocacy organization. A lot of speeches, white papers, conferences that are aimed at getting as much press coverage as you can, congressional testimony, that kind of thing. And that was all focused around sort of, because if you look at when the organization was founded, they were seeing kind of when the shuttle era is beginning to kind of hit its stride, sort of the early 90s, when the system's beginning to work, and they began to look at that and say, yeah, but we were promised this future where it was going to fly every week, and we were all going to, and by then we're all supposed to be in space, and there are hundreds of businesses that relied on this system and all this. And when that wasn't happening, they began to say, okay, what did we do wrong? So the early days of the foundation, those early days were focused on changing the conversation. That would be the words the founders would have used. They would have said, how do we change the conversation about space? And then the next years after that, I would say, really beginning, I'd say the early 2000s through almost the present day was maybe what's missing is we need to start doing what things we can in both the sort of public space and in taking actual tangible steps. What's missing is a private industry in space. And so, again, for those of you who followed this over a long period of time, a lot of the advocacy the organization did began to shift and began to say, you're never going to get all those big visions of humanity in space, whether it's Moon or Mars or whatever you like. You're never going to get anywhere if you don't have a true commercial private space industry. And so when I was a very young person coming in my early 20s into the industry, my first role within the Space Frontier Foundation was starting the NewSpace Conference. So for those of you who are familiar with it, I ran NewSpace 1. We're coming on NewSpace 14 this next year. And the purpose of that was, I remember even arguing rather strongly with some of our founders, if you know who they are, saying enough of this airy-fairy stuff, like let's get down and actually invite entrepreneurs and people who are investing in those entrepreneurs' ideas and start trying to have events that drive that activity. And so as it's worked out, as all of you know, the last 5 years are where those efforts and the efforts of countless other entrepreneurs and investors and others have really started to pay off. And so we've begun to see this kind of groundswell. So in the sense of the existence of a real commercial industry, that's no longer the issue. And so from an organizational standpoint, where we're sitting around today is saying, what's our next step? What's the next thing that we're going to do? We're not going to throw away advocacy or throw away the conference, but there's been discussion of, do we seek lots of money and do a big hardware project? Do we begin trying to focus on more of the supporting the companies interested in human stuff? Sort of where do we shift as an organization? So for all of everyone's perspective, that's the kind of discussion that's going on within our organization today. Now, I mentioned some of the activities that we do. Those of you who are familiar with the NewSpace Conference, we'll be doing that again in Seattle this next year. We'll be doing it out towards the end of June. Look for details to come out with that. We continue to have a bunch of staff. We support both events on Capitol Hill, sort of the various storm events where you have large numbers of volunteers come and mob congressional offices and try to fight for different policy things. Sometimes that's coordinated with individuals, companies, organizations, some of which are in this room, and sometimes it's not coordinated at all. It moves around year to year, but if you're familiar, that's something. We put out a newsletter called NewSpace News, I think 10 or 15,000 subscribers. It's a monthly summary of all the things that our staff can capture that's going on in the industry. And then we also have a project called NewSpace Venture Labs, which has done a whole bunch of different things. Mostly it's been West Coast, California-based, but it's small events for entrepreneurial companies, trying to connect up either companies and investors, or sometimes larger companies and small companies. We've done that in combination with VC groups. We've done it in combination with other organizations that are focused on developing small companies. So there's a bunch we do there. It was mentioned in the last talk. I'm not sure if how familiar people are because it's our first year doing it. But this is the first year that we'll be doing NewSpace Europe. This is only 5 weeks away now. So NewSpace Europe is the first time we've tried to export the NewSpace brand and the NewSpace concept of having a conference where entrepreneurs, investors, and larger companies can finally come together and really try to interact and do what we can to move new ideas into the field. As you know, we've been doing this in the US for a while, but this is the first time we've tried to do it in Europe. It's currently partnered with the government of Luxembourg, and I've recently been told they plan on doing this for the next at least 3 years running with us. So this isn't a one-off event. This is something we'll all be seeing more of. I'm really looking forward to it. Our planning team has put together some spectacular content. Because it's paid for by the European government, it's a whole lot cheaper than most US conferences. So if you have the excuse to go there, I do strongly recommend it. The big question for us, as I said, though, is where do we go next? expect to see these events continue, expect to see the small events expect to see the small events continue, and I would definitely be on the lookout for larger stuff from us. We have a couple of sort of projects in the works where we'll likely be adding to our staff. Right now, we're a sort of day-to-day staff of just a few people, I guess 5 full-time and then about 10 or 15 volunteers as our core day-to-day, but it's going to be getting bigger, it's going to be going faster, and you know, I'm around too, so if anyone wants to learn a little more about the organization, please come chase me down. But that's the Space Frontier Foundation. Thanks much.